to get a link in that article to a website. And on the website, people could go and take a test to see how strong their depression was. And then it offered a therapy. And then they would retest after the therapy. The therapy lasted 6 weeks. And the therapy was the 3 blessings. The 3 blessings is a rather simple process. At the end of each day, you write down 3 things that went well that day and why. So that was the sole treatment. After 1 month, they started. He had 50 people that were severely depressed. They had a depression score of 34, which they're crying, they can't function. I mean, they're in terrible shape. And that went from 34 to 17.2, which is on the cusp between mild and moderate depression, which is a lot better than where they were. And this is more surprising to me. Their happiness score went from 53, bottom 10%, to 69.8, which is in the 40th percentile. Seligman has huge amounts of data on this. He called a colleague who treated depression for what his methods would produce in the same time period. Professional cognitive therapy plus medication after 1 month moves the depression score from 34.1 to 19.6. Not quite as good as the Time magazine. Certainly a very different cost and difficulty. Now the Time magazine piece doesn't have controls. It's not. It's kind of like we're living in a world now where we're becoming very conscious of what kind of evidence is needed to adopt a treatment. And Marty certainly didn't have enough evidence to adopt a treatment. However, he tried repeatedly to get a grant to do this. It's not something an entrepreneur would do because you can't patent a treatment like this. You can patent drugs. And the pharmaceutical company certainly would not want this methodology to proliferate. So he could never get a grant. It was constantly blocked, he believes, by the pharmaceutical companies. Whether it was or not, we can't prove, but certainly it would have been to their disadvantage. But here's writing down in your journal 3 things for 3 weeks and producing a major change in your mental illness is rather impressive. The second example, this is the most impressive accomplishment. Positive psychology goes to war. In December of 2008, General George Casey, who was the Army Chief of Staff, invited Marty to a meeting. And Marty got there. There were a number of colonels and generals in the room, and a bunch of his books scattered about the table. And Casey described the problem of soldiers returning from deployment, and the problems of depression, divorce, suicide, drug abuse, PTSD, and asked Marty if Marty could do anything about it. So Marty said, Well, we have a process called resilience training, which insulates people somewhat against bad events, makes them more resilient. They rebound faster. He said we could do a pilot study and see if that would work. And Casey said, we're at war. We can't wait. And his idea was that Seligman would train sergeants to train the troops. So sergeants would be made into master trainers. Casey said that his sergeants were some of the world's best trainers. They ended up giving University of Pennsylvania a $30 million unbid contract to train sergeants, which is the largest grant I've ever heard of in psychology. But Penn was the only institution could do it. That's where Marty was, and he had built an infrastructure there. So by the time he wrote his autobiography, which is published in 2018, they had trained 40,000 sergeants. Troops who received training from those sergeants prior to deployment